All right, Mike Stubbs. Thank you so much for just carving time out to talk to me. Um, why don't we start at the beginning? Where did you grow up? Did you have brothers and sisters? Did you come from a military family?
Yeah, yes, sir. Well, I actually grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have two older brothers and a younger sister. We're all pretty close in age. My one brother's 80, one brother's 79, I'm 76. Sister will soon be 75. And didn't grow up in a military family. My dad, he was in the military and he was in during World War II. He had also had three brothers who were also in the military. One was Army, two were Navy, and my dad was Army. My dad, he was one of the lucky ones. He was married and had a couple children whenever he was actually drafted during World War II. And when he was in basic training, uh, when I did basic training, we used the pogo sticks, and people wore helmets and things of that sort. So you battled with a pogo stick. Well, back in the World War II era, they boxed. The trainees with basic training would box. Well, my dad, he had been boxing some that they'd already actually knocked two persons out, and he didn't know it. But the sergeant from the boxing team, the U.S. boxing team, Army boxing team, was actually at the base where they were at. It was a base in Louisiana, and he walked up to my dad and asked my dad, "Did you ever box?" My dad said, "Yes, he boxed a little bit in the Golden Gloves, and plus he did a lot of boxing at the YMCA in Charlotte." And he said, just wanted to talk to my dad a little bit. Well, my dad actually, they asked him to come try out for the team. So my dad actually made the Army boxing team during World War II. And he was a middleweight and loved it. And he said the only thing he ever did stupid was old Joe Louis came to visit. And I know you know who Joe Louis was. Joe Louis came to visit the base where the boxing team was, and based in Louisiana. And Joe Louis, he'd come in, had his clothes on, suit and tie, and all that stuff. He was in the army, but that was all, for propaganda. That's just for people's morale, boost their morale. So what happened? He met all the boxers and so on. The press was there taking pictures and things of that sort. But Joe Louis disappeared, but he came back. He had on his boxing trunks and his gloves. He got in the ring and said, "Okay, fellas, come on, let's spar a little bit." Well, none of the heavyweights won't even get in the ring with him. And he kept saying, "Come on, somebody get in the ring." Well, my dad said, "What the heck? We're just going to, spar around a little. We're not going to box." So my dad got in the ring with him. And probably Joe was probably outweighed my dad 100 pounds or more. Because, like I said, Dad was short and stocky. He was strong. But he got in the ring, him and Joe Louis, they're just, sparring around a little bit. Well, Joe Louis swung at Dad one time and he left an opening. And my dad he said, natural instinct. He said he wasn't thinking. He came up with an uppercut, hit Joe Louis in the chin, actually stunned him a little bit. But he said that was the biggest mistake he ever made. Joe Louis come back, and he didn't try to knock my dad out or anything, but he let my dad know real quick who was the better person in the ring. And when my dad finally got out of the ring, he told the sergeant over the boxing team, "Don't ever let me do anything that stupid again."
Yeah.
That
Wow.
was his big boxing tale from the Army. So,
Talk about poking a tiger.
so
Uh,
he never went overseas, so he was one of the lucky ones.
what about your older brothers? Did they surf?
Neither served. I'm the only person in my immediate family that served in the military. I've got, like I said, I've got four grandsons, right, aged from 32 to 27, and none of them have been in the military. So I'm basically the only person in my immediate family that was actually in the military.
And how did you come to be in the military? Were you drafted?
Well, actually, as I told you, I was working for West Electric, and I wasn't real crazy about the job I was doing. I said, "What the heck? I know I'm going to be drafted." So I went to the draft board and volunteered for the draft,
Uh,
and never told anyone in my family that until I was laid up in the hospital after I come home from Vietnam from my wounds. I'm in Womack Army Hospital. My family comes to visit me there, and that's when I actually opened up to them and told them, I actually did. I volunteered for the draft. So, you know, they tell you don't volunteer for anything in the Army, as the old saying goes, but I did volunteer for the draft.
well, I hear that story a lot, right? People successfully avoiding the draft by volunteering.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Thinking
so,
you'll get a job, but I didn't. So, good old
so
infantry.
what year was that you volunteered?
That was June of '66.
Okay. And where did you go to basic training?
Went to basic training at Fort Gordon, Georgia. Was enlisted in Charlotte. Went to Fort Jackson for processing. Then from Fort Jackson, the good old drill instructors picked us up and took us, to Augusta to Fort Gordon, which I thought was a long way away, but it's actually pretty close to Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
Took my basic at Fort Gordon, Georgia, then left there and went to Fort Polk, Louisiana. At Fort Gordon, a couple of good things. They actually sent me to truck driving school. Did well at that, but I never drove a truck the whole time I was in the Army, in basic or anywhere else. So go to Fort Polk, and I go to knew right when I went to Tigerland, I knew what I was going to be doing. Never heard of Vietnam before I got drafted. It was never mentioned in high school. Nobody ever talked about Vietnam. Didn't talk about it during processing at Jackson. They didn't talk about it at basic training at Fort Gordon. Never mentioned Vietnam. No one did.
So when was the first time that you heard the name Vietnam?
When I was told I was going to Fort Polk, I was going to Tigerland, which was an infantry training destination at Fort Polk, Louisiana. And you talking about somewhere that looked like Vietnam? It did, because there's a lot of swampland, stuff like that. I tell people, actually, people ask me about it because I've met other military people that were at Fort Polk, and I always called it Fort Puke, Louisiana. I'll tell you, that was whatever the good Lord had left over, he put there in Louisiana, that's for sure.
So what did you learn there at Fort Polk?
Well, actually, I was one of the lucky guys when I got there, because I'll never forget when I arrived on a Friday evening, going to the barracks I'm supposed to go to. I'm walking down the barracks floor, and all of a sudden I heard somebody hollering, "Who's walking on my floors?" It was one of the drill instructors. I guess he just wanted to give the trainees a hard time, even though we were all out of basic. We were going to our advanced training. And the next morning, they had a formation. And myself and I think about 6 or 7 other guys, they called our names. I said, "Oh, crap, that sergeant must have got my name last night. What did I do? What am I going to have to do now?" Well, we were lucky. They sent us to a special training school. It's called LPC, Leadership Preparation Course, that they had at Fort Polk. And, here we are, I'm 19 years old, and I really thought I was somebody going. This is like going to Officers Candidate School, OCS, and it was an actual full 2 weeks. We wore special armbands, we wore special helmets, things of that sort. Did a lot of special training. We did everything you would do at OCS. I mean, everything as far as the leadership and so on. When I left that school and went back to a infantry training unit, wasn't the same one that I had went down there with. Some of the guys I went with, they were already a couple of weeks ahead of us in training. But we were lucky because all of us, we got to be the rank of a sergeant, a platoon sergeant. And we're all squad leaders or a platoon sergeant. So, we basically had all the privileges of a regular sergeant during the training, which was great. Very unique.
So you're 19 years old and you're a sergeant?
Well, actually, it's temporary there. It's called, advanced individual training. Is AIT, is advanced individual training in the Army, and we all call it advanced infantry training because it still is AIT. But we had special armbands we wore. I mean, we just had the privileges of a sergeant.
I see.
Because if you were a squad leader, you had a dozen or so men you were responsible for during training. You had to go through the same identical training, but they just still give us some privileges. We didn't have to pull KP, stuff like that.
So when did you find out you were going to be deployed to Vietnam?
I actually didn't know for sure, to be honest. Whenever our training finished up, they sent us all home for a couple of weeks and told us to report to Fort Dix, New Jersey. Well, I had a good friend who lived in Washington, D.C., so he invited me to come up and spend, a few days there. So I had my 2 older brothers actually drove me to his home in D.C. And he and I, we spent a few days together. He took me around D.C. and a few days later, his parents drove us to Fort Dix. So, Fort Dix, and we got there, and everybody was telling us everybody goes to Fort Dix goes to Germany. I said, "Well, that's great. We're probably going to go to Germany." But next thing we know, we're boarding a plane. They're telling us we will be going to Vietnam. Never was told orders until then.
That time that you were hanging around in D.C. and just seeing the sights, Vietnam didn't come up at all?
No, never thought about it. I mean, at AIT training at Fort Polk, it was Vietnam. I mean, everything was Vietnam. We knew what Vietnam was then because a lot of the training we have, and we had to do escape and evasion and stuff like that. And if you, on the night of escape and evasion, if you got captured, you got roughed up pretty good. So, we had to avoid being captured. And what the funny part was, the evening of that, we had to cook our own meal. And what they did, they asked if anybody was from New York, anybody from Chicago, guys like that, the big cities, and they put them in a big pen. And then they turned a bunch of chickens loose in there and told them they had to catch those chickens. That was going to be their meal that night. If they wanted to eat, they had to catch that chicken. And if anybody could have got that on video, that would have been great. Shame we didn't have cell phones back in those days. But now that night we had to go out in teams of 4, and you had to go through this whole area that where they were trying to capture you. They were actually pretending they were the VC trying to capture you. And luckily, I didn't get captured. We did have a couple of guys come after, hurt us, and they started coming after us. Well, we were able to hide from them. Those two split up, and the one came real close to us, and he was a full sergeant. Well, we jumped him. The next thing I know, when it was all over, and we all finally got back to the designated area where we were supposed to meet up after the escape and evasion, they wanted to know who the guys were that jumped this sergeant, and we didn't know what they were talking about. We all played dumb. Yeah, we don't know what you're talking about.
Well, somebody jumped a sergeant.
Yeah.
So when was it exactly that you left Fort Dix, and what was your route from there to Vietnam?
Well, we left Fort Dix on a plane in early November of '66, and we flew straight across the country. I remember stopping, I believe, in California for refueling, and then they stopped in the Philippines for refueling, and they let us leave the plane, but we had to go in the terminal, but nobody could leave the terminal. So you're going to be getting right back on the plane. So we didn't get to do any touring or anything. We got right back on the plane, flew straight to Tan Son Nhut Airport in Vietnam. We're all of us guys, we're nervous. We don't have any weapons with us, and we landed at Tan Son Nhut, and we figured as soon as we got off the plane there, we're in Vietnam. We're going to start getting shot at. You would have thought you were Charlotte Airport the way it was. I mean, it's just like a regular airport. They put us on trucks, and we're riding down through Saigon. It was like uptown Charlotte, Seattle, anywhere of that sort. Nothing's going on. And you see the Vietnamese people, you start noticing them. They take us to a place called Long Binh. Long Binh was the base where you go to be designated to your next location. And
the Repo Depot.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It was got there kind of late in the evening, and so the next morning we had a formation, and next thing you know, they're walking through the formation, and they're telling certain guys to come with us. Well, what happened? The guys, and I was one of the unlucky ones, I didn't get to shave that morning because I got in so late that night, and when we got up the next morning, they didn't give us a chance to shave or do anything. So we got on the poop burning detail, and in Vietnam, you didn't have, flushing commodes. You had these buildings that were built out of wood with screens, around it and so on. And at the back of it, they were raised up. You had a door you open. You had a 55-gallon drum cut in half. That's where all the human waste went. And every day, whoever they designated had to pull those barrels out, take them out, pour kerosene in them, and burn all the waste. And thank goodness I only had to do that detail for a few hours. They hollered my name, so I was told that I would be going to Zion, 1st Infantry Division. So that was where I got lucky there. I didn't spend much time there. Get to Zion, and what was so ironic, he didn't know. We all talked on the plane going over. Nobody worried about rank. I mean, there was captains, lieutenants, there was PFCs, there was sergeants. But nobody, we just all talked. We knew then where we were going. And one of the fellows was Saltel, Don Saltel. He was a captain. He and I went through the whole work together. He had to go to Long Binh also, but he didn't have to do any details, anything of that sort. Well, they put us on a chopper to Zion, which was the 1st Infantry Division headquarters. And we got there, and that evening we spent one night there, and I'll never forget. We had bunks to sleep on, but there was no mattress. All we had was a box springs. And that was probably one of the most uncomfortable nights I think I ever had. I slept better in the jungle. And The next morning we got up and they called Sawtell's name, they called my name and told us we would be going to La K, be going to Alpha Company with 2nd Battalion, 28th Infantry. So he and I had already, kind of made a friendship there. So that was really nice to have the company commander already know who you are. So we go there, and he becomes the company commander over the 4 platoons and so on, the 3 weapons, and the 3 infantry and the 1 weapon platoon, which is your mortars and so on. And he was a good guy. He stayed there about 6 months. After that, an officer can process and get a job kind of in the rear, but he was a good company commander. He was the company commander when I first started. I actually started as a PFC, as a rifleman. Then I became had a real good platoon leader. He was from Alabama, Troy Oliver, and Troy had been there for a couple of months before I got there. And you talking about a Southerner? He was a Southern all the way through, and he after a couple of weeks, he told me, he said, Stubbs, you're the smallest guy in the platoon, but I'm going to put the M60 machine gun with you. So I started humping the M60, which I had to carry it and 400 rounds of ammunition plus all my gear. He was just a good guy. He actually stayed in the military. He and I are still in contact with each other. He retired a major general. Real nice guy. He was wounded in Vietnam prior to me getting over there, but real super nice guy.
So what was sort of the daily experience there at Like I know you're.
Like it wasn't too bad. You just if you were not going out on a mission or patrol, you pretty much didn't do a whole lot of anything. You just took it easy. I actually had a club there for the enlisted men, and a club there, for the sergeants, and the officers had their own club, which was Block K. We were unique. We were the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Infantry Division for the the 1st Infantry Division. We were the only brigade in Vietnam that had the Vietnamese village inside of our perimeter. Everybody else, if they were near a Vietnamese village, it was beside of them, things of that sort. Like Zion, where the 1st Infantry Division headquarters was located, they had a village a couple of miles right outside of it. But we actually surrounded this Vietnamese village, which is an old French village that the French had whenever they occupied Vietnam, and the Vietnamese were living there then. It was unique. We had bars, we had things we could go to, and sometimes the fellows would sneak off at nighttime and sneak into the village and go and see some of their lady friends and stuff like that, because what they're going to do to you if they catch you. The MPs would try to catch guys in the village at nighttime because it was off limits. You were not supposed to be there, and it wasn't nothing to be running out of the village. And here would come. Sometimes you just have the Vietnamese running out with you, but they were actually VC. We were our Alpha Company, we were right next to the La K cemetery. And believe you me, Vietnamese people do not go in the cemetery at nighttime. That is no for them. But, we'd sneak in the village at night. I guess one of the funniest occurrences we ever had, we were running out one, had a new guy with us, and we were running out, and the MPs are actually chasing us. And we told him, go over there and hide in that little tool shed. And it was a building. Well, he opened the door of that tool shed. Well, when he stepped in, he went down. It wasn't a tool shed. We knew what it was. It was where the Vietnamese went to use the bathroom. So he's hollering, and the MPs had to have heard us over in the bushes laughing. But they wouldn't open the door because this young man's hollering, wanting somebody to help him get out. With the MPs, they didn't want to even touch him. They found him, drug him out, got him out, told him he going back to his company. They didn't want to put him in his Jeep. I mean, he was covered with, poop and stuff like that. But when he got back to the company, he wasn't too happy with us. But we let everybody know what happened. It was just one of them funny things that you always remember.
So how often would you go out on patrol?
Well, if we were in Lock K, you actually would go out on ambushes every couple of nights. You would go out on ambush patrol right outside of Lock K. Or if you did not do that, some nights you would be just on the perimeter in the bunkers. They had bunkers all the way around, the brigade, and you would have bunker duty at night, things like that. Kind of took it easy. Didn't worry a whole lot about it there. I know one night we were going out on an ambush patrol. We always crossed the same area. There was a big, it's like a little creek bed, but when the monsoon season came in, it was like a river. And we had to cross that. I'll never forget one night we were crossing, and the water was it was deep, so we actually had to take an air mattress and put our weapons on the air mattress. People had to guide it across because we didn't want the weapons getting wet. Well, what happened was the water hit it so hard it flipped it. We lost a machine gun, we lost a couple of M16s, so we knew right then we could not go out on that ambush. So we had to turn around and come back. And as we turned around and looked back, actually right where we were going into the jungle, here come 3 VC out of the jungle. They were waiting on us because they knew basically that's the area we would be going into. And you just never knew who the enemy was. I mean, we knew that there was VC in the village. People knew it. Every once in a while, we would actually take the village and we would do which we call them search and destroy. But you go in the village trying to find out if there's any enemy in there. Go around to all the hooches and go in and interrogate the people and talk to them and so on, trying to see if there was any VC. But you weren't in base camp that much. You might be in there 2 or 3 days, and the next thing you know, you're going out on a big operation like Cedar Falls, things of that sort. You're getting on helicopters, and they're flying out to a designated area where you're going to be doing search and destroy in the jungles.
I mean, do you remember the first time that you were in a situation like that?
Oh yeah, I know. Like I say, I actually remember. Wasn't there long? We had an ambush one night. The ambush was triggered. We killed 3 VC that night, and I had just taken over the machine gun, and I'll never forget that night. See, the thing about Vietnam, I actually had never seen a dead person in my life. No one in my family had ever passed away. I was lucky, still had all my grandparents and everything, and it was my first reality to seeing dead people. I mean, I'll never forget that ambush. It was pretty crazy. And but we would get on the choppers there in Lock A, and like I said, they would transport us to an area. And wasn't long after that. I mean, I moved up. So I went in the Army in June of '66, and here April of 1st of April of '67, I'm a sergeant. I got promoted that quickly. So I give up the machine gun, and that's, I carried a 45 because if I went into a tunnel or something, I carried that and a couple of flashlights. But, you're always going on missions. Sometimes the missions, you would actually have contact. Sometimes you could find traces. I mean, Charlie was pretty smart. He knew where we were a lot better than we knew where he was. And go out on ambush at nighttime. We knew that old Charlie's probably down in the tunnel somewhere nice and dry and warm. Here we are out on ambush. Even in Vietnam, there's a warm climate, hot climate. Nighttime, monsoon starts pouring down rain. It got chilly because you wouldn't let your men carry the ponchos because a poncho would sound like a tin roof with the water hitting on it. You carry a poncho liner, but the poncho liner gets soaking wet. But the worst part about when the rain stopped, the darn mosquitoes showed up. And those mosquitoes were like buzz bombers. I was a little guy. I was probably 110 pounds soaking wet. And I felt like, 2 or 3 of them boys are going to just pick me up and carry me off. I mean, they were healthy mosquitoes. And you took malaria pills. You had to take those on a regular basis. We actually had a few guys that didn't take them. And, a couple of them actually got malaria, I guess, because if you got malaria, you got out of the jungle for a couple of weeks. But not thinking about, here you got malaria, it could come back on you anytime in your life. So, that was the situation there. But I took my malaria pills. I didn't want to get it. So I'd read up on it.
So you mentioned tunnels, and of course that's the kind of the focus of this episode. We want to learn more about that particular job. How did that come to be your job, and do you remember the first time you went into a tunnel?
Oh yes, it was early April, and like I said, become the squad leader and sergeant. And the situation was with Big Red 1 First Infantry Division. When I was there, they did not have a tunnel rat company. I group them in, basically tunnel rats, and they were based at different locations. We did not have them at all in the division. It was a volunteer thing. You couldn't, tell men they were going to go down in that tunnel and such. And we had guys. I mean, there was guys that they would have been court-martialed before they would have actually went in. They were that scared. And I just, I don't know. I was a little guy, and one thing that always amazed me. I don't know if you've ever saw the movie Journey to the Center of the Earth. It was back in 1957. You can look it up sometime. It's called Journey to the Center. There was a remake of it, probably 20 years ago, but this was back in '57. It's about going down to the center of the earth and all, the it's just the things that supposedly was down there, dinosaurs and all that kind of mess. But it's just fictitious. But I said, here's my chance to see what's going on. Well, the first time was they wanted to try something new in Vietnam. The VC knew that we went out on ambushes at nighttime. It was always usually squad size. They knew what we did, how we worked things. Well, they wanted to try something different. Close to Zion, where the First Division headquarters was a village, and they knew this village was heavily infiltrated with Viet Cong. So what they wanted to do, they took our company, our battalion, and they flew us on choppers after dark. And they landed a couple of miles from this village where we wouldn't be heard, the choppers and so on. They wouldn't hear the choppers landing. And we had to walk, that night to that village. We surrounded that village. And actually during the night, they didn't think much would happen. But here come 3 VC out of the village. Well, that they were killed. We took care of them pretty quick. Well, nothing else. The rest of that night, nothing. It was all quiet. Nothing was going on. They knew we were there then, because we actually surrounded that village. We were so quiet. They did not know we were. This village had like a dike, and you had to get up on a hill to see over into the village, and which was very unusual. But the next morning, we went into the village, started searching the village. We were searching every hooch, every building that they had. We were walking along, and all of a sudden, I looked over and I saw this thing. I wasn't sure it was like. I said, "Look, what is this?" I looked at it. Well, it's got to be a tunnel, because it's like a little hatch, and it wasn't quite closed all the way. And what I did, I flipped it open. Nothing happened. So I knew right then. They said they want to know who would be willing to go down the hole. I said, "I'll go." So I said, "I'll go." I went down in the hole, and it wasn't a tunnel. It was like a room, and it was kind of dark. I had my flashlight and so on with me, and I knew somebody. I could smell him. I could smell somebody in there. And finally, I shined the light. There he was. I mean, he said something to me. I don't know what he said. I said he don't know what I said to him. He was probably as scared as I was. I mean, if anybody says they went in tunnels and they were not scared, they didn't go in tunnels. That's all I can say. Because if you did not, if your heart wasn't racing and you were not nervous, something's wrong with you.
Mike,
But
can you describe this room? I mean, how
oh
far
yeah,
down did you have to go? How big was it?
it wasn't far down at all. A few feet down, and the room was pretty good size. Best I can recollect, it was probably, I'm gonna say maybe 8 by 8. It wasn't huge. It was like what they call it, kind of like a spider hole. They had spider holes where they could dig down into the hole and hide.
And how
And
tall?
yeah,
How high was the ceiling in that room?
well, it was probably, I want to say 8 feet, something like that.
Okay.
It was
Okay.
well made uh, hole in the ground. I mean, these guys like a room in underground. Well, finally, I got him coached and got him out. I had to grab him and shove him out of the hole. And because, like I say, some guys, if a person was pretty good size, they couldn't have got down in tunnels anyway. So you had to be a little guy to go in there. But finally got him out. When I got him out, see, we had S2 with us, which was, the S2 people interrogation. Plus, we had the Arvins working with us, because they would be the ones interrogating these guys because they're speaking Vietnamese. Well, they got him out. He tried to claim he was just an old farmer, and he was scared. They figured out we were there. They were going to be checking the village. He got in that hole to hide because he was scared. And well, what it was, they started interrogating him. He kept wanting his pants. Kept, I didn't know what he was saying. And they finally said the interpreter said he wants his pants. He had on, like underwear is all he had on. So I went back down and I found his pants. Well, his pants was full of money. I took his pants, went back up, threw them out, and I went back down and started finding all kinds of documentation. He had notebooks, he had books and things. He had the names of the people in that village who contributed to the VC. And I mean, and some of the guys say they got these books. They were in heaven when they got these books, because it had all kinds of information in it. It told who give what and so on, supporting the VC. And he turned out to be, basically, they said he was basically like the rank of a captain, kind of like a tax collector. He wasn't actually a fighter. He was more of a, I guess you could say, like a bookkeeper type guy, something of that sort. And that's
Hmm.
probably one he was so scared. but they interrogated him, got all the information out of him. So we cleaned the hole. I got everything out of the hole, all the documentation that he had, and they loved that. So we finally they took him. They actually put him on a chopper. I don't know where they took him to. I'm assuming they probably took him back to Saigon or somewhere for more interrogation. We started moving again. We hadn't gone 20 yards and looked up, and there was another one. But this one was kind of in an open area. Well, I flipped it. When I flipped it open, here come a grenade out, and everybody scattered. The grenade went off. So we knew whoever was in that hole was not coming out under our terms. They were not going to come out. So we started trying to throw grenades in the hole, and every once in a while we'd get one to go in, and he'd throw it back out. And finally, when he threw one out, we opened fire a couple times, and we shot his hand off. I even have pictures of this. Shot his left hand off. His left hand's laying there, and we still kept trying to get grenades. Finally, we got a grenade go in the hole, and it went off. And what happened was they still had more grenades in the hole with him. He had a belt around him. There was 3 men in that hole that day, that tunnel, and it killed 2 of them instantly. Well, one of them was still wounded pretty bad. Well, I had to go down in the hole and drag out those guys. I mean, they're just, they're torn up pretty bad. One of them was almost cut in half. So I got the bodies out, and I'd bring it to the entrance. And the other guys would pull it and pull them out. And one of them was still living. He didn't die right then, but he died probably within an hour later. They're trying to get information out of him. Well, knew right then I had to go in that tunnel to see what was going on. So I go in the tunnel, and one of my men followed me in, and I told him we got in there, and I told him, I said, "You're going to stay with me. Because if something happens, I hit a booby trap or something happens to me, might have to pull me out, or vice versa." We come to like a little intersection, probably gone about 30 yards or so. Come to a place where it went left and right, and I said, "Well, we're going to stay together. We're going to go left. You stay right behind me, because if something happens, you can get us out of here." So we go on, and I probably go in another 30 to 40 yards. I come to like a little door like thing. I open it up. It's a well. That was one of the ways they got in and out of that tunnel complex. That was one of their, it was either an entrance or an escape route for them. But
is this tunnel complex that you're walking through similar to the other room that you described in terms of being, fairly large and roomy?
No. When you first start out, you had to crouch down. I mean, like I say, you had to be a little guy to go in these things. Vietnamese people are little; they're small. I mean, they probably weigh 70, 80 pounds, or 90 pounds, if that much. But this one pretty much was crawling all the way. You couldn't stand up in there. And when I opened that little door, I reached over and I felt something. And I said, "What in the world?" I shined the light. There's a snake laying there. And I'm assuming they probably put that snake in there in case we found that entrance, to deter them from coming in. They would put snakes in different places in tunnels. And sometimes they would, that happens, a string tied to them and so on, just to put them in there to deter us from coming in. And, they would have booby traps sometimes. Well, I told him, we said, we've gone as far as we can go. We're not going to go down the one to the right, see where it went. I wasn't worried about it. So let's go back. Let's go out. Well, we go back out, and we're crawling back, and I actually grabbed a snake and pulled him with us. That snake just limp. And we got back to the entrance. Well, he went out first. And I said, "Look, guys, look what I got." I threw it out, threw the snake out. The snake just laid there. And I was, my friend and I, we were both laughing. We were as happy as we could be. See what had happened. Those VC, the reason shot his hand off it, they had been in there smoking grass. Those people grew it over there like you grow grass in your yard out here. They were under the influence of that marijuana. And they wasn't feeling no pain. Plus, they probably could have had something else. They had opium, they had everything over there. And what happened was that snake had been breathing the same air as them, the smoke and stuff in that tunnel. That snake was totally limp. He was, and myself, my buddy, we were high. I know we were high. I tell everybody we were as high as Georgia pines when we come out. What was so funny? They could smell us. We come out, and the guy said, "My God." And we actually had some of the guys coming up wanting to smell our clothes because it had that marijuana on our clothing. So we finally ended up having after. We had to wear the rest of the clothes that day, and we found a few more tunnels that day. And they captured several VC that day in that village. We didn't stay overnight. They cleared that village, went back to Lock A. But I was glad too, so I could change uniforms. 'Cause I had to wear the same uniform all day. You didn't take a change of clothes with you.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
sometimes you were,
that's just amazing that I mean, going down in that tunnels, as you said, it wasn't a designated role,
no.
right? It was somebody's got to go down there. I can fit, so I'll go. How many tunnels did you go in that day?
Oh, that day I went in several. And what was so ironic about them, it's like, I don't know if they figured out that we knew the tunnels were there, because there was tunnels connecting in the village area. Uh, didn't run into anything else that day. I mean, I found objects in there, found a
Mm-hmm.
couple of weapons in the tunnel and stuff like that. I'm assuming they knew we would be going into the tunnels. They figured they were safer if they just went to the hooches and act like they were just Vietnamese person. Because
Sure.
you didn't know the enemy. They could be
Yeah.
your friend during the daytime. They could be a Viet Cong at night. We knew that in Lock K because, like I said, the Lock K they had places where you could go and gentlemen could have relax, have a beer, and they had girls that worked these things and stuff like that. They actually had these bars in Lock K. They had 3 different bars, and the doctors actually would come check these girls once a week to make sure nobody had Lebanese disease, stuff like that.
Sure.
Now, these
Sure.
girls, they were there for the pleasure.
So, I mean, you're 19 years old. You've never seen a dead body, and there you are pulling them out of these holes in the ground. You know, I'm just, I have a son who's 21. I can't imagine, and he's mature for his age. Uh, compared to most other 21-year-olds I know. Um, but I can't imagine him in that situation.
I'm the same way about my grandsons. As I told you, they're 30, 33 to 27. I couldn't picture them ever doing this kind of stuff. I don't know. You just get a mindset. You feel like you're invincible. 19 years old, bullets. They don't. They're not gonna hurt me. I'm invincible. But I did learn, yeah, bullets do penetrate. Shrapnel does penetrate. But you just have that mindset. You get to where you don't. I never thought about being dying or being killed. I
Even
just never.
even after you saw what that grenade did to the enemy.
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. No, no, no. You just don't think about it. You just don't think that way. I mean, and you don't make you got your men in your company. Like I said, I was a squad leader, they were my men, and I didn't really, you don't get real close to them. You don't make them your buddies because you never know when something happens where they got to depend on you telling them what to do, and they got to do what you tell them to do when you tell them. So it's that situation there. But no, you just never really thought about dying. I mean, you would be nervous, and I'll never forget we had an ambush one night that we had set up, and here we are. Gosh, had been set up for a couple of hours, and all of a sudden, I heard one of the guys. He didn't holler, but he made a squelching noise. I said, "What in the world?" He fire ant had bit him. And what happened? We looked down, and here come a whole darn swarm of fire ants. People see these fire ants we got over here. They call them fire ants, little piss ants that bite you and so on. Over there, fire ants they were pretty good size. They could actually sting you, and I mean, they were big. If you didn't, they didn't move for you. We actually took that night. We took some of our medicine. I mean, our bug spray stuff. We rubbed on us the lotion we used for the mosquitoes and stuff. Put it down in front of them. Didn't bother them one. We pat the ground, they start humming. So we knew right then we couldn't stay at that location. We had to actually get up, and I had to take the squad and remove this ambush squad on down to another location. We had to move about 100 yards, and we're walking down this little trail. And I said, okay, I want 2 men. Have a hand grenade in your hand. Don't pull the pin, but have the grenade ready. Because we had no idea. We knew Charlie was in the area, and we tried to be as quiet as you could, but you just never know what's going to happen. And I told myself that night, I said, if I make it home, I'll never be in the dark again. I just like I know actually the second time I ever went into a tunnel, that village we were in, I went in the second time, my flashlight went out on me. I was probably 30 or 40 yards down this tunnel, and my flashlight went out. And crap, I mean, you talking dark. You couldn't see nothing in front. The only thing I could see was where I had come in, just a little bit of, like a little piece of light coming through the hole where I'd come into that tunnel. So I had to back out. And finally, after that, when I got back to base camp, people laughed at me, but I started carrying a pouch with me. I carried a spare flashlight and I carried spare batteries. I said, this will never happen to me again. I was not going to be stuck in there and not have light because, you just, because you don't know what you're going to run into. And didn't like, you don't really like shining the light, but you had no choice because, I mean, if the enemy's in there, what's the first thing he's going to shoot at? He's going to shoot toward that light. Because I know we went to one tunnel complex. I mean, like I say, there's things I did in tunnels I will never ever talk about. Some things I just had to do that I had no choice. And I know we found one tunnel complex, and it was just started down the hole, and I just barely could get in it. And when it started out, I was crawling, then I started kind of almost do a stoop, and then I could almost stand up. And then I heard gunshots. He was not shooting at me. What they were doing, they were letting us know they were in there. So I had to back out and get out of the tunnel because we had no idea what was there. So we actually brought in a flamethrower, put the flamethrower down in the hole and shot the flamethrower. That takes oxygen out of the air and everything else. And we throw smoke grenades down in the hole, things of that sort. Throw grenades in the hole. But what it was, we didn't go back to that location. We set up our NDP, our night defensive position for the company in the general area. But it's kind of in a circle because you have where you got contact with each other. Well, the next day when we went back to this complex, started going back down in there. I mean, actually a couple of guys went with me, and it turned out to be a hospital underground. It was amazing. And what it was, we found out where they had another way. It was a lot more wider and open at the other end that they had taken. They took a lot of stuff with them. You could tell that, but they left a lot of stuff behind too. Equipment, medical equipment, some weapons, and then there was some blood there. So we're assuming this was probably a hospital where they actually probably maybe perform surgery and stuff. They had like a little generator like thing. They actually had like a bicycle. I guess that's what the person I'm assuming got on this bicycle. That was the theory we had. They got on this bicycle, and that's how he created power to generate and have lights in there and stuff. These people were amazing with some of these tunnel complexes. I mean, these tunnel complexes were there when they fought the French. So they had them all the way back in I guess it's like the 40s when the French was occupying Vietnam and fighting with them. And just incredible to see what these people could do with a tunnel.
Hmm. Well, how long did you spend doing that job?
Well, I pretty much did that job. Like I said, I got there in November. I started basically, like I said, in early April, and
Mm-hmm.
I would do it until I was I had I already had my papers. I was actually going to go to OCS. I had a platoon leader who took over after Troy Oliver took over our platoon. That's when I was promoted to sergeant. He had been a sergeant. He went to OCS, come back as an infantry officer. And he and I just clicked. And he told me, he said, Stubbs, you'd make a good officer. So I'd actually fill out papers and everything else. I had orders. I was coming back to the States to go to OCS. Already had orders to go to Fort Lewis, Washington, which is infantry officer training location. And but like I say, I only had a few days left on my tour when I got my third and final wound, shot in the neck and sprayed with shrapnel. And some, things happened, that kind of changed my mind on a lot of that stuff. And we would find complexes and go into them. We'd find, base camp, and they always had all these bunkers in the base camps, and we'd have to go into these bunkers and see what was in there. Because I'll never forget, I had a really good friend who was from Puerto Rico, and they tickled me. They would still try to make you think they didn't understand English, but they did. They could speak English as good as you or I when they wanted to. And I'll never forget, I told him, don't pick up anything. Well, he picked up an ammo box, and there was a booby trap. He got messed. Matter of fact, it hit him in the eyes, the face, and everything. So never saw him again. Only thing we know is he lived, but I think it actually blinded him.
And
But
you don't know what happened to him.
I'm sorry.
You don't know what happened to him. You don't know what.
No, we just know he went to the hospital. He never came back. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure they shipped him home, but and we do know he didn't die. But just so many times, I tell everybody I must have probably used several of my 9 cat lives because, I'll never forget. We were walking down and we had found an area that was heavily infiltrated. We kept finding rice caches, and see they eat rice and fish heads and stuff like that. We started finding rice caches, and we wouldn't take and burn them, destroy them. We'd take and pour gas on them and stuff like that where they couldn't eat it. I guess we want to make them mad if we didn't more than anything else. And we finally we set up some ambush sites and things like that. Well, we actually found some wires, telephone type wire, and they brought some Vietnamese in, and they tapped into these wires and started talking to these guys. And next thing you know, they cut the wire. So they were hoping that these five fellows they were talking to would have thought the other guys on our end was also VC. And what happened was, here comes some guys looking to find out where the wire was cut. It was three of them, and we put them out of their misery. But I'll never forget, we did not do anything with the bodies. We left the bodies laying there because they kept hoping that maybe more would try to come to pick these guys up. Well, a week or more, these guys were still there because Charlie knew we were in the area, and he probably figured out what we were trying to do. But I know on this same mission, I'm walking down a trail, and I heard a click. And I looked over to my right, probably about 20 yards away. There's the jungle, but it's like a big tree, and there was a VC behind this tree. He had a big claymore mine. It didn't go off. Had it gone off, I mean, he knew who I was, and because I had my RTO behind me, my radio man, so he would have just, if that claymore had gone off, it'd probably wiped out the whole squad right then. Because, they didn't have claymores like you've probably seen our claymore mines, what they look like. On the front of it, it says point toward enemy. I mean, that's kind of dumb, but you got to, because, it has an oval shape. And actually on the front of it, front toward enemy is what it says on it. And they didn't have stuff like that. They could take an old garbage can lid. They could take anything and take, concrete and stuff like that and put it inside of this stuff, and they would take our old ammo boxes. We'd catch them in base camp taking old ammo boxes. Everybody says they're probably just taking it to build something with. Yeah, they would take the rods out, cut them up, take stuff like that, use anything they could find for claymore to build a claymore mine. Well, we put that young man out of his misery, but like I say, if that just didn't go off, I mean, just other stuff, just triggered ambush one night. And I'm standing out after we triggered the ambush. We actually had taken our claymores. We learned Charlie real quick. He knew what our claymores were. And sometimes we'd have NDP set up in the jungle. Well, this one night we had an ambush set up. And actually we had gotten smart also. We started putting trip flares under our claymores with the pin pull. So if Charlie picked up our claymore, that flare would go off. And I'll never forget that night. One of them picked one of our claymores up. The flare went. He's standing there holding this claymore. I mean, he's stunned. He don't know what to do because, I mean, it's that trip flare lights it up like day. He's just standing. Well, we blew the claymore mines. He's blown all the pieces. So we triggered the ambush and started firing into the area. And we told that we wanted to pull back to the company area, but they would not let us come back to the NDP. They said, you've got to stay out there. So we told the guys to move down because we were securing Highway 13. You probably heard of Highway 13, Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh Trail. And we had set up actually set it like in a ditch that night. Well, we told the squad to move on back down. Myself and the squad leader, we stayed behind for cover fire. And I'm sitting out in the middle of this road with my M60, firing my M60. And actually we saw some rounds come by. It's never hit me or him because every fifth round I fired was a tracer. I could see where it was going. So we had to move on down. They would not let us come back. We already told them that we know that Charlie's moving toward the perimeter. Tell the guys to be ready because they knew they were going to be probing. And the same thing happened later on. Old Charlie, they done figured out what we were doing. One of them picked up a claymore mine. He turned it around back toward our guys, and he tripped that flare. And our guy set the claymore off and messed up three of our guys really bad. I mean, Charlie, he was a smart person. I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, if we hadn't had artillery and some of the things we had, it could have been a mess. Us fighting against them because just like that night we Alpha Company, who I was Alpha Company 2nd Battalion, 28th Infantry, 1st Infantry Division, and we set our NDP up probably I think it's about a mile down the road from Bravo and Charlie Company and the battalion command group. I don't know if they did it to make us kind of like guinea pigs or what, but that's the appearance we had. Because I know that a couple of nights before that, my machine gun, I'm to have my machine gun pointing down the road because you want your strongest weapon in the area where you can put out more firepower. Well, I saw something myself, and I said they had a scope that we could use. I can't think of the name of that scope, save my soul. But every time you looked, everything looked green through it. Only thing you could do was make out, forms, people, and stuff like that. But it was a night scope that somebody come up with, and they sent them to us to use. And I could see somebody down the road. We knew what he was doing. We knew that he was putting out, probably anti-tank mines and stuff, because all night long, from where Bravo Charlie and the command group was to we had two tanks rode back and forth all night long. Them son of a guns would turn on those big TV screens. They had the big lights on, about the size of the old. You've probably seen the old TVs that had the big tube thing in the back. That's what these looked like. And we wanted to shoot those out because they'd come down the road shining, and it'd shine up on us. But we saw that guy, and I said, please let us open up on him. We know what he's doing. They said, no, didn't want to give away the M60 and let him know where it was at. Well, the next day, we go out on a search and destroy, and what we do, the tanks are there. The tanks pick guys up and take them down the road, drop them off. We had a guy had come in just the day before. The day before he was that new. He got on the tank when he go down the road. The tank stops. You jump off. He jumped off the tank. He jumped right on the anti-tank mine. That was it. Been out in the jungle 2 days and he's gone. Just just amazing. Because we didn't like it whenever they would tell us we were going to be having tanks or PCs, personnel carriers, working with us. Because you get in the jungle, and these son of a guns would, they're going through there. You would be behind them. That's him going in front. Well, they're knocking these ant nests down. It's the crap out of the trees and stuff like that. And these red ants, the big old red ants, those son of a guns would start biting. Because you had, your body, you've been doing all this sweating. Your body's got all this salt on it. And they loved it. I saw more than once, a dozen men just stripping down in the jungle, taking their clothes off to get these ants off of them. Charlie could have had a heyday or something like that. And then I'll never forget one time we had tanks and PCs. Again, we were going to be in the jungle, but they told us we were going to ride on them. Well, I told all my men, I said, nobody gets on the PC. Everybody get on this tank with me. I got on the tank, had a PC on each side of us, and we're going down through there. And next thing we know, I actually thought I was dead. There was a tremendous explosion, huge explosion, black smoke everywhere. You couldn't see anything and couldn't hear anything after that. What happened? One of the PC on the right, hit an anti-tank mine. Charlie could even take. We had, we dropped 500-pound bombs from the jets and stuff like that. They had these butterfly bombs, and I'll tell you what a butterfly bomb is in just a second. But people think a 500-pound bomb is huge. It's not. It's only a couple feet long because it's so much metal. It's the weight of it and so on is where it was. And we don't know what that PC hit, but what happened was it took the PC, took the gun turret, threw it one way to the right, and threw the sergeant that was in the gun turret to the left. Well, when that gun turret went off, when it threw it off, it threw all the men that was on the PC also. Well, that gun turret came down on one of our guys, came down on his head. We found his steel pot. His steel pot was just like that. It was squished that much. Well, he probably the best thing ever happened. He lived for a couple of weeks, but he's like a vegetable. I mean, they were keeping him alive, and he died. But that day, Charlie could have opened up on us. We could have done nothing. Like I say, it was black smoke. I wasn't sure if I thought maybe I was dead because I couldn't hear, I couldn't see for the smoke and everything. And most likely, nobody ever mentioned anything about a concussion. Every one of us probably had a concussion from that explosion being that close to us. And but we never thought about it. Never ever thought about it.
Well, Mike, before we talk about your exit from Vietnam and your homecoming, is there any last thing that you would like our listeners to know about either those tunnel complexes or the experience of going down in them?
Well, it's just like I said, it's one of those things. There's things that I did have to do that I just don't really want to talk about. I mean, it's just that type of thing. I mean, it's the situation. like I said, every tunnel you went into, you didn't run into somebody. Sometimes you did, and sometimes you didn't. I mean, there was one tunnel I went into that they were there. They actually fired. I returned fire. I know I killed two, wounded one, and we got the wounded one out. But like I said, when you use a weapon in the tunnels, you couldn't hear for 2 or 3 days later because it was so loud in there. I mean, it's a miracle. I'm amazed that didn't bust ears. I got tinnitus so bad right now that I sound like it's got ringing all the time, and it'll never go away. I've had it ever since I was in Nam, and it's just. I'll be honest with you, those tunnels were very impressive. Those people were just amazing. What they could do. I mean, like I said, they had them forever. They had them there when the French were there. They used them against them. But these people lived in these tunnels. They actually lived in them. Like I said, we'd be out on ambushes or we're out on NDP, set up in a foxhole, and the foxhole's filling up with water. Those guys are down there dry. These things they had them ventilated, everything. Just incredible what they could do with these tunnels. And just like I said, there's things I did that sometimes I'm not proud of it, but I knew I didn't have any choice. But like I said, I'm glad every time I went in there wasn't somebody in there because, like I said, I'll admit I was scared. I didn't know what was so funny was I wanted to have a good night. We had the bayonets they give us, but they wasn't worth the crap. I'd actually sent my dad a letter and said, Dad, I got a little job here I'm doing. I'd like to have me a really nice knife. Well, I said, hoping he'd send me something. My dad, do you know what a Jim Bowie knife is? You,
I do.
my dad sent me a knife, a Jim Bowie knife, and I carried that knife with me down in tunnels. And I did have to use it a couple of times. I won't say what I did with it, but I did have to use it a couple of times. And I'll never forget that knife meant so much to me. I know when I was wounded so bad the last time that when I got to the hospital, everything was gone when I woke up the next morning. All I'm there and laying there in pajamas and stuff. But I never know what happened to that Bowie knife. I don't know who got it,
Hmm.
but yeah,
Well, do you mind talking about the circumstances that of your that third wound that you were talking about?
well, I can talk about what happened that day if you'd like. We're
Yeah, just so people can sort of understand the circumstances of you leaving Vietnam when you did.
well,
And you said it
we
was very close to the end of your tour, right?
correct. I had less than 20 days left on my tour when this happened. But what happened was the First Infantry Division wanted to try something new. Every infantry battalion had an Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie infantry company. Well, they wanted to add a fourth infantry company to each infantry battalion, and it would be called Delta. So you'd have Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta infantry companies. And so what they did, they brought an infantry company on a ship. And it took them 30 days to get there. The whole group came over green. So we had Alpha Company, and I was still with Alpha. We had a gentleman named Clark Welch. Clark Welch was a sergeant first class. He had been over the recon platoon. Well, Welch, he was so good, such a good soldier, he went straight from sergeant first class to first lieutenant. He didn't even have to be a second. He went straight to first lieutenant. And as I told you, or I mentioned earlier, Don Saltail, he had rotated out of Alpha Company. But they give Clark Welch Alpha Company, but they told him you won't have it long. You'll only have it a month or so because you're going to be having a new company. You're going to have the new Delta Company will be your command. They told Clark Welch that would be his command. So what happened was Clark was with Alpha only about a month or so, and he had to go to Cameron Bay to meet these guys coming in on the ship. And what was so funny, there was a captain with them Captain Jim George. And Jim George actually was from Spartanburg, South Carolina. And Jim George come off the ship leading all this whole company. They were all gung ho. And Clark Welch and Bud Barrow. Bud Barrow was the first sergeant with Alpha Company with Clark Welch, and he was also going to go with Welch to Delta. Well, when all these people got off the ship, Jim George told Clark Welch, this is Delta Company, which, Jim George thought it was going to be his, and Clark Welch, the first lieutenant, told the captain, says, nope, this is my command. So Jim George had no idea what was happening. What happened, Jim George was being given Alpha Company, which was smart because he didn't have any experience. So he was going to have an infantry company that had experience. Well, they told Clark Welch what they wanted him to do was pick 3 sergeants from Alpha Company, and also you would have some people coming from Bravo and Charlie that had experience, and 3 or 4 from the other 2 companies. Well, he picked me and a couple other sergeants to go with him
So
from
that
Alpha.
that Delta Company wouldn't be
Well, yeah,
entirely composed of
Green.
FNGs, right?
Correct. What they did, they took half a dozen of the guys, from each little platoon that was with this new company, sent some to Bravo, sent some to Charlie, and some to Alpha Company. And because we were probably, I guess, more than about 90% of the company was green, and you had the 10% of us guys that had experience. So we had to actually take these guys, and trained them. We trained them for close to a month on jungle type stuff and going out on patrols and on some short missions and things like that. Well, on October the 8th, we were told that there was a big mission, a big operation coming up, and they told us that we would be going into an area, and this area had never been searched before in the Iron Triangle, and a place basically they called it Hobo Woods. But we were going to this area, and when we got there on the 8th, Clark Welch, that evening of the 8th, he called me and Luther Smith. Luther Smith was my best friend. I think you and I talked about Luther. He was a platoon sergeant, and I was an assistant platoon sergeant. And he also had our little second lieutenant, Harold Wachter, who had no experience. He came over on the ship. He was green. And Clark told us to come up to the to the command post. He wanted to talk to us, and we got there. He told us that the next day, the 9th, we were going out on a search and destroy mission. It was going to be Bravo Company and Delta Company, and that Delta Company would be in the lead. He said, Stubbs, you'll be the lead squad because you're the most experienced sergeant, so you'll be the point squad. So we talked about that a little bit, what we were going to do, and he said they know that this area is heavily infiltrated with VC, and they actually knew there was some actual North Vietnamese army in the area too, NVA. So we get up the next morning. Well, one thing that's so ironic it happened that evening. We were walking back to the company, and old Harold Wachter, he just wasn't infantry. He was a good guy, but he wasn't infantry. He made a statement to me and Luther heard him. He said, well, if I can maybe get a slight wound, I can get a job in the rear. And I looked at him and said, well, I hope you get it. You don't say that to your sergeants. That's just something you don't do. So we get back to our platoon positions and tell the guys what's going to happen the next morning. So we tell everybody, once you get some good rest and so on. So the next morning, well, the worst thing that happened that night, we're walking back, we heard a gunshot go off. Pistol went off. What happened was our forward observer was cleaning his pistol, and the pistol went off and shot his RTO, killed him. Well, this guy went hysterical. They had to actually bring a chopper in that evening and get him out of there because he lost it. And he was actually tried in a court, and they got off. Well, they brought in another forward observer the next morning to be assigned to Delta Company, and he was Pinky Durham, Harold Durham. He was actually from Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Well, I got to talk to him for just a few minutes, and he picked up on my accent real quick. And but he didn't go out with us that day because he just come in with a morning chopper. So we go out on this. We start on the mission, and we're moving real slow. The jungle is really, really thick, and we're moving slow. And we stop and do a few clover leaves periodically, and I would put a couple of men around our lieutenant and his RTO and stuff like that. And I would send guys out on clover leaves. Well, I'd go out on every once in a while. I'd go out on the clover leaf. When we had something unique with us. We had 3 Chew Hoys. Chew Hoys were Viet Cong that were ex-Viet Cong that turned over to the south, to our side. And only one of them could speak English at all, a little bit of English. And I kept him with me and my RTO. Well, I put one out on the flank with one of my guys. I put one up with my point man. So we go on these little clover leaves. We were going down you don't walk on a trail, you walk beside of a trail. And one of them stopped and pointed down. And right there, they had run a wire across this trail, and there was a 500-pound bomb that they had booby trapped. That I guess our jets had dropped and didn't detonate. So they, we had to mark it, and they're supposedly, the guys, demolition people supposed to come blow it up and so on. So we keep on going. Well, we probably been going a couple hours. And we I came to this huge opening in the jungle, about the size of 2 football fields. I called back to Clark Welch and I told him, I said, his call sign, my call sign. I told him that we'd come to this opening, and here's an opening in the jungle. And well, what's so ironic? Old Harold Wachter come on the radio, told me, he said, Stubbs, you're to call me first, call me directly. Well, Clark Welch come back on the radio, told Wachter, you stay off the radio. Stubbs will talk directly with me. And we talked for just a second, sir. I said, sir, I got a recommendation. So we don't want the enemy to know what size our force is. I recommend you take the rest of Delta Company and Bravo Company, and you go around the edge of the jungle, stay in the edge of this opening. I'm going to take my men. We're going to cross the opening. I'm going to spread them out. We'll cross the opening. We'll be the guinea pigs. If there's anything,
you mean like
here,
bait?
Yeah, but like bait, exactly. So we do that, and we separate. So we're going straight across this opening. Here's the rest of these 2 companies going around the outer edge. So that separated us, probably 400 or 500 yards or more. And we got on the other side. Well, as soon as I got to the other side, I radioed back. So we found some OPs, observation posts, where somebody had been set up. Thank goodness they wasn't there that right then. Well, we hadn't got back into the jungle, probably 20 or 30 yards, and all of a sudden we saw 3 BC. They saw us at the same time. They were getting ready to chop wood. Had we been real quiet or whatever, if they started chopping wood, we'd have got upon them real easy. Well, they saw us. They took out running. Well, I called back to Clark Welch. I told him what I found. I said, we got 3 BC. I said, they're running. I said, we're going to pursue so they can't set up an ambush. So we pursued these. We probably went another 30 or 40 yards, and all of a sudden, one popped up right in front of my point man. Well, my point man froze. I shot that Charlie. When I shot him, all heck broke loose. And what was so bad, those 3 Chew-Hoys, 2 of them took out running the opposite direction. One of them stayed right with me. The one that was me stayed right with me. So we started the next thing we know, here's a little battle started. And, there's automatic weapons. And next thing I know, I'm there, and I felt something hit me. And I saw the flash of my rifle, and it hit me in the neck. Bullet shot me, and I was shot in the neck, and I was one of the first ones hit. And all heck broke loose then. So I'm laying there for a few seconds, and the first thought I had, I stuck my hand up there, smelled all this blood, and started spitting up blood. And I'd always, seen on television, this person spitting up blood, he's bleeding internally, he's going to die. So I figured I was dying. And it's only a matter of seconds. Next thing I know, I started doing things, telling my guys what to do. There were snipers up in the trees. I already had 2 of my men pinned down. One had already been hit twice. Well, those 3 up in the trees, I took them out and just kept on going. And the good Lord was looking after me that day, because I know I got up and I had several other men wounded. I moved them to places where a couple of them couldn't fight anymore. I got behind trees. We had anthills. Over there, anthills were huge. They were huge. And you could actually hide behind them, but I just kept moving guys around and just doing different things. And
all of this while bleeding from the neck.
Yeah, I was bleeding in the neck. I'd also been hit because they blew a couple of claymores. I had some shrapnel hit me too. Mm-hmm. And I'm taking my guys, and finally, when everything was finally over, I know the one that shot me, he was gone. I know I took care of him. There's no doubt in my mind. I opened up on him. And finally got the M60 machine gun up there, and I got him lined up and got him spraying the area. When the little battle was over, here come the rest of the company moving up, and it just, the medics came up. And they said, Stubbs, you're hit. And I said, I'm fine. I'd already taken my medical thing out, put it on my neck, and I told him, I'm fine. Don't worry about me. Go check on my men. So next thing you know, I got up, grabbed my Grenadier guy, the M79 guy, picked him up, put him on my shoulder, and grabbed 2 other guys by the shirt and started pulling them out to go out, because we knew a medevac chopper was going to be coming in. And I carried this one guy while I was walking back, and I finally got to where the rest of the company was. And I saw Luther standing over there, and Wachter was standing next to him, and Wachter looked like a deer in headlights. Luther looked at me, and he hollered at me. He said, Bubba, what in the world happened? I won't use the words, but I told him, I said, one of them little SOBs got me. But I said, he's no longer with us. And that's the last thing I ever got to say to Luther Smith. because as I told you, 8 days later, he was killed along with, 63 other men. But I
So
finally got out to
you were medevaced out also along with
yeah, well, I got all my guys. I wouldn't get on the medevac chopper. Clark Welch is standing there. And the medics came up to me again. I said, "Don't worry about me. Get these guys on the chopper." Finally, all my guys got on the chopper. And Clark Welch looked at me and said, "Stubbs, you got to get on. All the men on the chopper, you got to get on. They're ready to go." So I got on the chopper. I turned to Welch. I turned and actually saluted him. He saluted me back. Well, I fell over. He thought then I must have fallen over. He thought I was dead because of my neck. Because of my neck, it looked pretty bad. So they took us back to Like, and here they take us there, and then they tell us we got to go on to take you fellows on to the main hospital. So that's where I go to the hospital, and that's the last I remember that I know I'm walking around talking to my guys. Are all some are on gurneys and stuff like that. I'm actually walking around. They'd already done an X-ray, and I'm walking around talking to my guys. I actually had that VC, the Chuhoy that was with me. He was on the stretcher. He'd been shot and wounded. And I'm talking. He's been here. They come walking out of a room. They said, "Holler, where's the guy with a bullet in his neck?" And I'm looking around. And then one of the guys says, "Him." So they told me not to move. So they put me on the gurney, roll me into surgery. And the next morning I wake up, and I'm just laying there. I didn't know where I was at. I was in the hooch that they had for Army was just cot after cot after cot, wounded soldier. So I'm laying there, and that's when I finally wake up, and the doctor comes around later in the morning and tells me what happened. He said, "Yeah," he said, "you're lucky that didn't take your head off." He said, "Because it went in where it went in, it severed. I didn't have any pain. It severed the nerve immediately." And then I've got numbness. I got numbness in my face, and I touch my ear on my earlobe, and I feel it on my chin. I don't have any feeling in my neck, right jaw, shoulder, all that stuff. It's all dead. It just killed it instantly. I guess that's the reason I was doing stuff, because I didn't think I was hurt that bad. Come to find out, I was most seriously wounded that day. So, but then I'm in the hospital, numb for a week or so, and then they send me to Japan for more surgery. And I go to Japan. I'm in Japan a couple of weeks, and they send me stateside to Womack Army Hospital, Fort Bragg.
And when did you leave the military?
Well, like I said, I loved them. I wanted to stay in, like I told you about the OCS situation. They, what happened was when I was in the hospital in Japan, I didn't even know what had happened to our battalion. That 8 days later, our battalion's almost 144 men walked into 1,400 of the enemy. Basically 10-1 odds, and every man's wounded or killed but two. And like I say, Luther's killed, and Harold Durham, the FO, he's killed, and so on. The whole battalion command post group, the battalion commanders, battalion sergeant, lieutenant colonel, battalion sergeant major, all their RTOs are all killed. And I'm in Japan, and they put me and four other guys. I'll never forget being in this room. Each of us had our own nurse, and they'd already given us some morphine because everybody's getting ready to go in for some surgery. And here come a little guy walking in the room. I looked at him, and the other guy looked, and he was an Oriental guy. And I said, "What in the world is this?" The first thing I thought was, Vietnamese, VC. And it was a Japanese doctor. Well, he was a captain in the Army. He was a doctor, Army doctor. And he asked where Sergeant Stubbs was. And, the nurse said, "He's over here." He came over and started talking to me and said, he told me what he was going to say. "I'm going to go in. I'll take you. I got to open your neck back up. It's got some infection in there. We're going to have to clean all that out and then reclose you again." I said, "Oh, that's fine." I wasn't feeling no pain. They'd give us morphine. And he said, "You want to watch it?" And I said, "Sure." So he said, actually have a mirror set up in the room. You can watch what I'll do. Well, they're rolling me down a hallway, going to the operating room. There's another gurney being rolled not far from me. Heard somebody hollering my name, Stubbs, Stubbs. It was Jim Gillum. Jim Gillum was the RTO for Harold Durham on October the 17th. Jim was a sergeant, but he carried the radio for the forward observer. Jim was messed up really bad. And Harold Durham got the Medal of Honor that day. But Jim, he said, "Stubbs, we got to talk." He said, "They let us talk for a couple of minutes." He said, "By the way, Clark Welch had put me and two other sergeants in for battlefield promotion to E6 because we were doing the job of E6, E7s as E5s. And Gillum was one of the sergeants, and he said, "You heard about our promotion?" I said, "I hadn't thought about it." He said, the three of us, the third sergeant was killed on the 17th. And Jim said they removed us from the promotion list because we were of no more value to the division. And I didn't care right then because I wasn't feeling no pain. And then finally, when things started happening, and I get back to when I'm at Womack Army Hospital, and I'm finally released to the medical holding company, they told me they had my orders to go to OCS, Fort Lewis, Washington, be an infantry lieutenant. And I told them, I said, I'm not going. They said, what do you mean you're not going? I said, I'm not going. And I said, after what they did, I said, you don't do that to people. What made me the maddest, the third sergeant that was killed, all they had to do was give him that promotion posthumously. It wouldn't have cost the Army a nickel. And he could have put it on his tombstone. The family would have been proud. It would have been sad because he's dead, but he would have been proud that he got promoted. And I just told them, said, no, I'm not going. Then they asked me where I wanted to go. I didn't want to go to Fort Lewis, Washington, which is 3,000 miles away from where I was from. So I said, I'd like to go to Fort Jackson. So I go to Fort Jackson, and I'm there. I'm a drill instructor until I get out.
What was getting out like? Well, first of all, when did you get out? And what
June,
was
June of 68.
68? Man, a lot happened to you in a really, really short time.
Yeah, I grew up really quick. I just amazing. Things happened while I was a drill instructor. Some stuff with people and stuff like that. When I got home, matter of fact, I had a good friend. His name was Sid Huntley. His dad and my dad boxed together at the YMCA when they were young. And Sid, they lived about 3 miles down the road from where I lived in Charlotte. And Sid and I, we were childhood buddies. We grew up together. We would have went to the same high school, but my parents, we moved to another part of town. But Sid and I still hung out. It's back in the days of American Graffiti. Everybody had a nice car, stuff like that. You went to the drive-in restaurants and, flirted with the women. Well, Sid and I, we'd meet, we'd ride around together, and we double dated and stuff like that. Well, Sid's mom and dad, was like a second set of parents to me. We'd known each other since we were 5 years old. Same thing with my mom and dad treated him like a son. And one of the first people I wanted to see was Sid and his mom and dad, and they wanted to see me, so I went to see them. And Sid was going to NC State. He'd gone to college, whereas I went in the Army. And while Sid was at NC State, he got engaged, and he was excited. He wanted his fiance to meet me, and so we got in my car at his house. After I talked to his parents a little bit, his girlfriend went to a school called Myers Park. Myers Park is the uppity part of Charlotte. And Sid called her and told her we were coming over. She said, sure, come on. We got to their house. It was weird. We got out. Sid was excited. They were in the driveway waiting on us. So Sid thought, everything was, they were really happy to see me, wanted to meet me. We got out of the car. She didn't say hello, kiss my fanny, or nothing. She looked at Sid and said, Sid, you got to make a choice, him or me. And I looked at Sid, and he looked at me. I said, what in the world? I said, let's go. We got back in the car. I took Sid to his house. I said, I don't know what's going on. Sid, I don't know what it's all about. And only thing, Sid and I never saw each other again until I went to his dad's funeral many, many years later. He married her. Excuse me. They had 3 daughters, and they got divorced. But the thing about it, the only thing I could figure was she didn't want Sid being around me, because she probably figured we were going to start piling around again, start going out to the drive-in restaurants again, all that kind of stuff, chasing women. So, but, it just was very unique. And I never was called a baby killer. I was called a few things and stuff like that. But, not everybody knew what I did. Just my close friends knew that I was even in the service. I didn't talk about it. My wife, when I got married in January of 69. And for 22 years, my wife didn't know a thing about what I did. I never talked about it. Just never talked about it. And didn't want to. But I'll never forget one night, I know you know who Lee Greenwood, who had the variety show, had a show on television on Saturday night, country music variety show. And at the very end of his show, he had 8 country music singers that started singing God Bless the USA. And the number 8 singer was Charlie Daniels. And that person, he was an amazing person. He was so patriotic. He started singing his party, he had his head bowed. He was putting so much feeling into it. Something about it hit me. I started crying. I started sweating. My wife thought I was having a heart attack. She was scared her, and she scared me.
What year would this have been, Mike?
Gosh,
Roughly?
it was about 22 years later. I guess it was in the somewhere in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
in the 80s. And now I went and got in the shower because I couldn't stop crying, I couldn't stop sweating. Excuse me. Then I started telling her some of the things I did. And I didn't go into a lot of detail, but I told her things. And wasn't long after that, I started opening up. I'm glad that I did. And that's when I got involved with the Military Order of the Purple Heart. And we had a chapter here. And matter of fact, now I've been running it for 13 years. And I've told my guys, be proud of what you did. Don't be ashamed of what you did. You did what was asked of you. And infantry guys, they're unique. I mean, people don't understand. It's less than 1% of everybody that served this country got a Purple Heart. And it's like in Vietnam, only like 1 out of 15 was on the front lines. The rest of the guys were in the rear. You had to have one. I mean, you need them, cook, supply, different things of that sort. Truck drivers, people like that. But
Mm-hmm.
don't be ashamed of what you did. And I'm not anymore. I'll talk about it.
Yeah, we've been at it for a couple hours now.
Yeah.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
Not really. Like you said, Jake, your questions were good, and I'll just talk about what I want to talk about. Like I said, I don't go into everything and
Yeah.
things of that sort, but just little things. I guess there is one experience we had that you mentioned about the tunnels. We had a big ammo dump, and we never could figure out where in the world Charlie's tunnels, where he had them going under this ammo dump. I know during one of their New Year celebration, they decided to blow up our ammo dump, and that was just amazing. And we never could figure it out.
I remember from our previous conversation, you said you had 64 friends on the wall. That I've never talked to anybody who had 64 friends on the wall. I'm assuming that was mostly the
Well, I
what
didn't.
happened after you while you were in the hospital, and
Well,
142 out of 144 were killed.
no, 64 were killed, 72 were wounded. There
Ah,
was two MIAs. I mean, it wasn't really MIA. There's just nothing left
I see.
for recognition, and they're all on the same panel, 28 East,
Hmm.
all right together. 64 names. I mean, I got like 10 panels there with people scattered here and there, but that's the most together. Well, if you ever really want to read up on things that happened in October '67, that book I told you about, They Marched into Sunlight, by David Moranis, is a complete story about our unit, October '67. It's pretty incredible. I mean, they got
Marched.
pictures and everything. Matter of fact, there's a video out there about the battle. Yeah, it's got pictures. I mean, they actually found the colonel who was over the 271st Viet Cong Regiment, and they found basically, I guess you call him a company commander, was over the supply location where I went into that day on October the 9th. They got those two together. They thought each other was dead. So, but just pretty incredible, the pictures and things, the stories.